Thank you very much for having me. I'm Sarah. I have a UK, I'm from England, but I now live in Canada and I'm an end-of-life doula. And my research, as it's come out in many of the conversations today, is on families' experiences. Within Canada, I should say. And these are some of the reasons. I mean, pretty self-explanatory. But I think as a practicing end-of-life doula, it was really important to me with the work, and I'm sure with many of you, to really get to the end user. Like, what are they saying? We think we do good work, or we hope we do, but how do we know that unless we're asking that question? And also, there's very little research out there, as we've all identified. So another reason why I wanted to pursue that. Next slide. So a quick overview of what I'm going to be saying today. Review of the survey results, review of the interview results, some common threads, highlights, and some further considerations. So how did I go about my research? Well, I was fortunate to use an existing online survey. Thank you, Emma and End-of-Life Doula UK, for sharing the survey they actually designed and created. And I just adapted it slightly for Canadian content. So thank you for that. So it was an anonymous online survey. And I also did 8 interviews. I obviously made, as I think I said, some slight modifications to it for the Canadian content. First, this is from the survey, and these are some demographics of the people who responded. I thought it was quite interesting because it aligns a lot with the research out there about the demographic profile of end-of-life doulas, which we've all sort of raised and highlighted. Just an interesting point, I thought. Okay, so the first section of my survey was what the support that the end-of-life doula provided to the dying person. And here you can see, as we click over, these are the types of support that were asked. What supports were provided to the dying person. And you can see here that emotional, there's no surprise here, that emotional and practical were, well, they're all fairly similar, but these were obviously the most reported of provision provided by the end-of-life doula. Next, what types of support were received by the dying person? And interesting here, advanced care planning and spiritual guidance were the most reported. The support provided to family members, and I'll say here also, I think, did I put it in here, and friends. So it wasn't skewered to family, as we've just mentioned. It also did mention friends in my actual survey, or anybody that was providing any sort of support. And the data here is showing, once again, the most valued support was emotional and practical.
So Sarah, I have given you I'm so sorry. I'm going to share it from my screen. So because I feel
We
like
have the wrong presentation up, but we're just going to figure it out.
I'm so sorry because
Apologies, we have the wrong presentation up. It's just missing some, it has a bit more clarification around some of these numbers, which are a little bit obscure to look in a presentation style. They've come directly from the report. Exactly. That's all right. Well, like these are 2 questions. They haven't come in as percentages. I think these were 2 additional questions asked to family members and friends, how involved they were. That represents about 70% felt very involved in decisions with the care, with the help of an end-of-life doula. And the second one, given enough help at the time of death, that was around, I'm just guessing these figures, I think it was around 70%. Felt that they had enough support at the time of death. Oh, we're going to another, going back.
One second. It'll be worth it, I promise.
I'm trying to think of things of interest. I think I also didn't say the number of respondents I had. So for my online survey, I got between 28 and 32. Some people opted out on some questions, but around, say, 30 as an average. And then I did think I said I did 8 interviews, so directly with families.
All right.
We're starting again.
Let's just go through. Oh, it's not sharing. Oh, I'm so sorry, Sarah.
That's all right. Anyway, I was going to say part of this research, it was really wonderful to be actually working directly with families. Obviously not in the survey, I didn't really have much contact. It's an anonymous survey, but when I got to interview the families, it was really, that's why we do the work, right? So that was really moving. And also hearing about some phenomenal stories of end-of-life doulas across Canada doing some fantastic work. Great learning for me, hearing how they provided support under some difficult situations. Most of people reporting through COVID. So they had other restrictions about being able to go into care homes or hospitals and hospices, rightly so, but that really did affect their experience with their families and their families' experience or friends or families' experience. So that did skew it.
That's
Right. So we'll just fast forward, click a lady, please, Emma.
me now.
Oh, sorry, it's ma'am.
Because I'm doing such a bang up job.
She's multitasking, Marion's complete skill set. No, keep going, keep going. We're going to, yeah. That's it. Perfect.
Yeah.
Now we're going to, okay, keep going. Have I done that one? I've done that one. Okay, here we go. So now we've got the percentages in there. Anyway, I think I sort of guessed-ish. So just some more information about how end-of-life doula support has helped families and friends with some of these decisions and care. Okay. I think I've got, can you go back one? I'm missing one, types of support. Okay, I'm not sure if I talked about this one or not, but here we can see grief. So we've touched on this a little bit, and I think this was interesting that came out of the data that grief support was really valued here. And I know it can be controversial, and it came up in our last conference. I think Annetta very rightly brought it up, as in we are doing this work. What are the sort of parameters and boundaries around that? And we do have to be very careful. I think one of the things that came out here, and I know I can speak from our practice, we shall speak to more tomorrow, is the thing that really we found in our experience, Ruth and I, in our work, is that people, it's having that relationship and that person that knows you're someone. And I think that's the type of support. It may need to be called something different, maybe, but I think that's what it's alluding to. I don't know exactly because it was a survey, but that's what I'm thinking. And then you can see last 2 days of life, spiritual guidance for the family and friends, or what to expect were very similar in the reporting.
So I'm just showing these because you've already.
Okay. We'll go to the place where a loved one died. Okay. Next one. Okay, location of death. So I think this one's quite interesting, but no surprises. 38% of deaths where end-of-life support was provided was in a person's home. And I would argue that 14% is also in someone's home. That's a care home. That is a person's home. So if we collect those together, that's now around 52%. The 24% category was interesting. That was under other. And when I looked into that further, those were people that were sort of saying car accidents or no death at all involved. And a big part of the survey we came out was a lot of support didn't involve a death. So I thought that was quite interesting. You can see hospice is the least working end-of-life doulas experience or wasn't reported that much in hospice, but it shows that we work across a range of settings. Preparedness for a person's death. And this is going to look very familiar to anybody from the End-of-Life Doula UK, Emma and the whole group's project, because a lot of these questions are skewed from their survey. So once again, thank you for that. Preparedness for a person's death. You can see the largest category there is 39%. But still, if you put in the 29%, you've got around 68% felt prepared. So generally people felt that their person's death with end-of-life doula support, they felt fairly prepared, I guess what I'm trying to say. 14% indicating that they were not at all prepared. And then this could be due to sudden death Or it could be the challenges, are you ever really prepared for a death of a loved one? This slide is, did families know the location where their person would die? 68% of families did, and did their person actually die where they wanted? And that's around the same figure. It's quite interesting. A quarter of respondents indicated that they felt that their loved one did not die in their preferred place. Could this be contributed to care decisions being taken out of their hands? Maybe. Going into hospital, possibly, or care needs changing or needing additional supports that maybe the end-of-life doula could not provide. The final column here, which I added just to see if end-of-life doulas are providing support with maiden, you can see that they are. This is about 5 out of the 28 respondents in this category, which represented about 15%, showing that end-of-life doulas are doing this work. And maid deaths or medical assistance in dying deaths in Canada account for about 4.1% of all total deaths in Canada. And that's about 13,000 deaths. Total deaths in Canada, I think, are around 323,000. Might have my figures incorrect, not quite correct, but roughly. Next slide, please. This is my favorite one. How people felt before and after. That's the crux of the question, I think. What do they think about it? So, bless my slide. Okay, next one. And here, doesn't want to move. If you focus here on the dark blue, it just is a little complicated on the eye. It's just the way that the survey was skewered. But if you look at the dark blue, I think that's the important. And you can see confidence here before and after, quite dramatic. Involvement before and after. Next column, stressed. I think that one, look at that real decline. And before well-being and after well-being. I think this really demonstrates the value of end-of-life doula support. Not that I'm biased or anything. Interviews. So next was my interviews, and I conducted them by Zoom, no surprise. And they covered around 5 provinces within Canada, which I was really pleased about. The demographics here were a little different. The age range was a little lower, so it started in the early 30s. I represented Alberta, Nova Scotia, Quebec, British Columbia, and Ontario. Interestingly, the participants were predominantly women and identified as white. So I put this slide up because it's trying to show the diversity of the number and types of support that were gathered from the interviews. So the types of support down this column: advanced care planning, grief support, dementia, life support, maid death, natural death, and ongoing support. So quite a range there of different supports from just only 8 interviews. And you can see the number is where they sometimes overlapped, like somebody might have been talking about advanced care planning, and it was some support in the home. So just a little overview just to show the diversity of not only location, but the types of support. These are my interview questions. We won't go through them all, or maybe I should. How did you know about end-of-life doulas? What was the reason you decided to use an end-of-life doula? What did you value most about having an end-of-life doula? What did you find most challenging about the service? Could they have done differently? Is there anything you didn't like about the service? And did the end-of-life doula provide any support after the death of your loved one? And what were the changes, if any, in your views of death and dying after using an end-of-life doula? Now, I won't go through all of them because that would take me forever, but I'll just pull out a few ones that I thought would be of interest to this group. How did you know about your end-of-life doula? So out of the 8, 4 of them knew through a friend. 1 through the community, 1 through a speaking engagement, 1 from a local funeral director, and 1 from a death cafe. And I think this shows the importance of sort of networking within your community. Reasons why used an end-of-life doula. This might be familiar with a lot of people that are looking for something else, was a key one. The second one, framed as allowing the process of individual feelings along with practicalities. To be a family and patients advocate in healthcare settings, that was a big one. And navigators of the healthcare system, which we all know can be very challenging. Other ones where people were very open to end-of-life doulas if they were into alternative, I'm going to put that in quotation mark, care support, so massage therapy or Reiki, or open to those sort of complementary or some people call alternative supports. There also was this sort of awareness, if people were aware of birth doulas, so that provided people with a lot of comfort around the name doula, which we know can sometimes be problematic or difficult to explain, as Emma alluded to. Next one, challenges or could have done differently. A big one here was sort of the awkwardness around remuneration. And I know some doulas charge for fees, some volunteer, and that's a whole another topic. But sort of things like doulas would go into a family and say things like, pay whatever you can. And that was relayed to me of feeling very awkward, because then how much do they pay and what services are going to be offered and how much should I have of that? So the unclearness around that sort of initial engagement or initial what am I trying to say? Initial engagement with the end-of-life doula and how to set that up. Meeting a new person at such an intimate time. I think most of us know that families, this is a big undertaking. You have so many relationships along your journey. So having somebody else into the mix just adds additional stress, or can add additional stress. And the trajectory earlier, we hear this a lot. I hear this a lot in practice too. I think this one's a really difficult one though, because it's not until you've had the support that you realize the value of it. I don't have the answers to that one. So some common threads that came through the data predominantly were the emotional labor, primarily by the end-of-life doula. And that's no surprise when you see the amount of emotional work that an end-of-life doula takes on. And also this sort of the humanizing of the end-of-life experience. And this came through a lot through my talking with my families. Humanizing the end-of-life doula experience was a direct quote from one of my participants. And also this one, I put one of the quotes here. What I valued most was meeting people who had the experience that I needed to learn from. With someone who came in and said, I have a basket of things. I've been through this before. I've been on this journey and it's not terrible. You know, that gave me hope. So a little bit more about emotional labor. That quote there in the circle is from healthcare, in the healthcare context. The act or skill involved in the caring role and in recognizing the emotions of others. So just going through sort of the importance and the amount, sort of the work that an end-of-life doula does as part of this emotional labor. Another great quote up there. So she came and sat with me and said, you can tell me 100 times if you want to, and I will always listen. But I think it's something that end-of-life doulas can provide, is this sort of what healthcare systems can't, is this time. We have the time, or the luxury of time. We often have small caseloads, and we have this continuity of presence. And I love that last point. I think that point came through. I have to give that credit to Marion, not myself. The emotional type of care that is more about caring with than caring for. Can't take credit for it. I think that was a Marion one. It was. And the next one was this sort of humanizing the end-of-life experience for families, taken directly from a few of my interviews. This knowledge, and I think Anetta touched on this too, is knowledge about death, dying, and grief at the micro level. And I think that's the core of our work. It's someone's essential self is maintained, and I think that's really important. Humanizing is about being human rather than just meeting individual needs. And it goes beyond the physical and requires the establishment of meaningful relationships and time, something that an end-of-life doula does have. It's recognizing also that the mind and body are connected and that care and support must address both. And it's putting the human element back into care at a key transitional stage in someone's life. And there's a really nice quote up there that you can read. I really valued their ability to form relationships, their ability to communicate clearly, their life experience and their wisdom about what this process was, or what this process was about, because then I felt okay. I joined a journey that someone else is familiar with. So some highlights here that came from, I guess, both the survey and from the interviews was that end-of-life doula support is not just about death. Very much is part of caregiver. End-of-life doula support is not just about death. I think 3 out of the 8 interviews weren't around death. They were either about support in long-term care home, advanced care planning, and grief support. So there were quite a few that weren't around actual someone's death. Caregiver support came up a lot, and it was quite predominant, and was of equal importance. And you can hear that as well when we talk about MAID. It's a big part of the work that we do is around providing that emotional support beforehand. It's a new way of dying. This is assisted dying, sorry, MAID, assisted dying. It's a new way of dying. And I think a lot of people are trying to figure out how best to do it and how best to have the supports. I have to say, depending on what province you are in Canada, it's often quite unclear about families are quite unclear about eligibility, about the process. There's little to no emotional support, as Kelly has alluded to, and families are constantly doing this sort of catch up to what someone has already, a catch up to what their first loved one has already decided. And then this sort of humanizing care piece again. Many of the participants commented on this as a shared human experience and the attention to details and the consistency and continuity of presence. Some nice little quotes there. I'll just read the one to the side. She was there at every step of the way, asking the right questions, like directing us and all. It was not easy, but it was fluid. And I'm so happy with a lot of the things that we did and how we did them. Further considerations. This came up, these were comments that were made not only on the survey, there was a section where people could make comments, and also throughout the interviews, people wanted to share this and got quite adamant about a lot of this. Incorporating end-of-life doulas into communities, organizations, and health systems. Integrating end-of-life doulas into in-home palliative care teams. End-of-life doulas should be funded through employee healthcare benefits or insurance policies, and end-of-life doulas in long-term care homes. And I think I whizzed through that because I'm mindful of time. So there may be some people who have further questions.